This happened when I was a young child, maybe about 8 years old. My parents had me late in life. My two older siblings are both at least 10 years older than me. So by the time I was 8, they were practically adults with their own lives. I was woken up one night, not by a nightmare, but by real sounds of commotion from downstairs. It wasn't just noise, it was the muffled, urgent sound of my parents' voices, laced with a panic I wasn't used to. I cracked my bedroom door open and listened. I couldn't make out the words, just the frantic tone. I tiptoed to the stairway and stood at the top, my blanket wrapped around me, and called down, "Mom, Dad." My mom came to the bottom of the stairs, her face a mask of stress in the dim light from the kitchen. "Go back to bed, sweetie," she said, and her tone left no room for argument. I listened without asking any questions, retreating to the safety of my room. But I could tell something was very wrong. I lay in bed, trying to go back to sleep, when the slam of the front door echoed through the silent house. Then, nothing. The silence was so total it felt loud. I presume my parents had left, but I was too young and too tired to puzzle out why. I listened to my mom's command still ringing in my ears, and eventually drifted back to sleep. I woke up again to more sounds from downstairs. It started with the soft click of the front door closing, followed by quiet footsteps. There was no talking this time. My first natural thought was that they were back home and were just trying to be quiet so they wouldn't wake me up. I listened intently, hearing occasional steps and soft suds from the first floor. I heard drawers and cabinets being opened and closed, the quiet scrape of wood on wood. I was almost certain I heard the soft thump of the fridge door opening, too. In my 8-year-old mind, I pieced together a logical explanation. It had to be my older brother, Chris. He was 10 years older than me, already driving, and notorious for coming home at all hours. Him getting home at 2 a.m. and rummaging through the fridge for leftovers wasn't just possible, it was normal. I held onto that thought, a logical anchor in the unsettling quiet. Eventually, I held my breath as I heard footsteps start up the stairs. They weren't rushed like my parents had been earlier. Each step was slow, heavy, and deliberate, the old wood of the staircase groaning under the weight. They got louder and closer until they reached the top of the landing, paused for a moment, and then made their way first thing to my door. My door quietly and slowly opened. I didn't sit up or move. I just had my eyes open, facing the door as I was still lying down. All the lights were off outside my room, so whoever was walking around was doing so in complete darkness. The only light was the faint red glow from my alarm clock. The figure in my doorway was just a black mass, a void in the darkness resembling the shape of someone's head and shoulders. I whispered every name I could think of, starting with the most likely, Chris, Mom, Dad, then, my voice a little shakier, "Who's there?" The figure didn't reply, it just stood there for a long moment, and then, just as silently as it opened, the door closed. I was left there confused, but now also mildly creeped out. I tried to rationalize it again. It must have been my dad, just coming to check on me after getting home. Maybe he didn't answer because he thought I was asleep and didn't want to wake me fully. After the footsteps went back downstairs, I didn't hear anything for a while. A stupid, childish curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what was going on. I slid out of bed and crept downstairs in the dark, keeping all the lights off just like they were. Every creak of the floorboards under my bare feet sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. As I approached the kitchen, I froze at the doorway, noticing a tall figure standing right in the middle of the room, perfectly still. Based on the size of this person, my mind defaulted to the only person it could be. "Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. A deep voice, a voice that was absolutely not my father's, replied with two simple words, "Go back upstairs." It wasn't angry. It wasn't gentle. It was just flat, a deep, empty command. I didn't even think. My body just reacted. I ran back up the stairs to my room, closed the door, and jumped under the covers, pulling them over my head. All I was thinking was, why did my dad's voice sound like that? The reality of a stranger being in the house didn't dawn on my innocent little mind. Not until a little later, when I heard the front door opening again and a real commotion from downstairs, frantic, familiar voices of my parents. I went to the top of the stairway again, and they were shocked to see I was still awake. What happened? I asked. They explained that Chris had gotten into a little accident, but that he was going to be fine. I wouldn't find out until months later that he had gotten into a serious car accident, driving in a condition he shouldn't have been. My parents got a call from the hospital and had rushed out to see him first thing, leaving me to sleep. My voice trembling, I asked my dad, "Did you come in my room before?" That was when I learned that they had been gone for hours. The color drained from my mom's face. She turned on my dad, yelling because, in their panicked rush out of the house, he had neglected to lock the door. Me telling my parents about the person at my bedroom door and the man in the kitchen caused my dad to search the house with his gun and my mom to call the police. The last thing I really remember was a police officer kneeling down to my level, asking me to give my story. To this day, my parents tell me that they felt like morons, having to explain to the cops that they left their 8-year-old son alone and left the door unlocked. I don't think anything of value was stolen, but having a complete stranger in your house, in your room, is already a terrifying ordeal. Now imagine going through that at 8 years old. It was around 2013 or 2014 when my family moved into a new house. The main reasons were to be closer to my school and for cheaper rent, but it was a pretty nice place, all things considered. It had a cozy fireplace for the winter and a decent-sized backyard. My little brother was about 7 or 8 at the time, and like a lot of kids his age, he was completely obsessed with Batman. His most prized possession was this toy Batmobile. It was his favorite thing in the world. If you pressed a button on the roof, it would light up with flashing blue lights and make a series of siren noises. He played with it constantly. One afternoon, he came inside from playing out back and announced that he'd found something. My mom and I, curious, asked what it was. He held out a small, wallet-sized school photo of a young boy. The picture was in rough shape, dirty, creased, and full of wear and tear, to the point that the edges were frayed and you couldn't see the year it was taken. We thought that, okay, some parent in the neighborhood probably lost their kid's picture. No big deal. And then my brother said something that completely confused me. He pointed at the face in the picture and said, "That's Buddy." I looked at him, my expression basically asking him to repeat himself, and he did, more firmly this time. He pointed again, tapping the worn photograph. "This is Buddy, he's my friend." I slowly nodded my head as if I knew exactly who he was talking about, but my mind was racing. The main reason this was so weird is because my brother didn't make friends easily. He was shy and tended to keep to himself. I didn't know him to have any friends, let alone a best friend I'd never heard of. And this Buddy character had only come up once we moved into this house. I shrugged it off, trying to find a logical explanation. I figured he'd finally made friends with one of the next door neighbor's kids or something, and maybe they traded school pictures as a keepsake. That night, around 3 a.m., when the entire house was dark and silent, I woke up to the sound of my brother talking. Naturally annoyed, I got out of bed and walked into his room to tell him to go to bed before he woke up our parents. But what I saw was strange. He was sitting bolt upright in his bed, staring into the darkness, and the tone of his voice wasn't like he was talking to himself or his toys. He was having a conversation, complete with pauses as if he was listening to someone reply. It was weird, but I was tired. So I just told him to lie down and go to sleep, and I went back to my own bed. A couple of days later, My mom was talking to me about my brother and asked if I'd seen him get up at night. I told her no, but that I'd woken up to him talking a few nights ago. Why, I asked. She said he had been acting weird lately. But as usual, we both just shrugged it off as him being a kid and going through a phase. In my room, my bed was positioned right across from my door, meaning if I turned over, I could see straight into the hallway. One night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I myself was and still am very afraid of the dark, so after I was done, I left the hallway light on, knowing my dad would eventually get up and turn it off. I was lying in my bed, facing the open door, when a sudden, loud noise made me jump out of my skin. It was my brother's damn Batman car, its electronic sirens blaring through the quiet house. I got up, fully prepared to tell my brother that he shouldn't be up this late playing. But when I got into his room, he was fast asleep in his bed. The toy, however, was across the room on the floor. Still making noise and flashing its lights, I walked over to it, clicked the button to turn it off, and went back to sleep, feeling deeply unsettled. The following days, my brother would not shut up about Buddy. It was Buddy said this, and Buddy wants to do that. It was honestly starting to freak me out. So, I went over to the neighbors' houses to the right and left of us. One house didn't even have kids, just an older couple, and the other house was completely vacant. This started to worry me, but my dad said it was probably just an imaginary friend he'd come up with. I went along with it, since I couldn't think of any other solution. But the toy car became a nightly problem, almost every single night. One of you SMY mom. My dad, or my sister would say, we heard my brother's toy making noise and had to go into his room and turn it off while he was sound asleep. I explained that I'd had to do it as well, and once again brought up my brother talking to someone. One night, my dad swore up and down that the toy was probably motion activated, but we all knew it wasn't. My sister and I were so unnerved by it all that we started to sleep in my room together, which I am glad we did. Or else I'd probably write this off as a bad dream. We were in my bed, talking in hushed voices, trying to keep each other calm and in good spirits, until we heard the dreaded, familiar noise of my brother's toy. We both froze and looked toward my open door. My brother's room was directly across from mine, and from my bed, we could see right into his doorway. Our expressions turned into those of pure horror as we saw our brother's toy car, lights flashing and sirens wailing, roll past the door on its own. We screamed and ran to our parents' room. They got mad at our brother, saying it was a cruel joke to play on us when we were already freaked out. What he said next sent chills down my spine. He just looked at them, his face filled with genuine confusion, and said, "It wasn't me, Buddy wanted to play that night." The toy went into the trash, batteries taken out and all. My sister and I were relieved. Until the next day, my brother had the toy again. My parents accused him of getting it out of the trash, to which he calmly responded, "But Buddy got it for me." The toy was then broken into small pieces by my dad and thrown away for the final time. My brother was obviously upset, but our parents got him a new Batman figurine, and everything seemed fine. It wasn't until about a week later, when we all felt that everything was okay now and that Buddy was gone, that the last thing happened. My mom was cooking chicken breasts on the countertop George Foreman grill. She had come into the living room to ask us something. And then we all jumped as we heard a loud crash from the kitchen. We ran in there to see the George Foreman grill halfway across the kitchen floor, as if it had been thrown with incredible force. My mom swore it was nowhere near the edge of the counter, and my dad had no explanations. Nothing happened after that, and we moved out about a year later. But to this day, I wonder if my brother's imaginary friend Buddy was ever really imaginary. When I was 10, my family moved to a new house in a different town. I was entering a new elementary school as a 5th grader, which is always tough, Starting out was incredibly awkward, as all the kids in my class had known each other since kindergarten, and I was just some random kid entering the scene. In my elementary school, you were made to sit with your classmates during lunch, and I remember how painfully silent those first few days were. Kids are extremely judgmental at that age, and I was judged as the new kid, so making friends felt like an impossible task. But in those initial days of being the new kid on the block, I actually met a few of the kids on the block. One of them was Dan, who was my age but went to a private school. We met while I was biking down the street, and he asked if I had just moved into the house on the corner. We started hanging out from there. He was a normal, cool kid. Then, a few days later, I met Alex. Alex didn't wait for a chance encounter. He rang our doorbell one afternoon and asked my parents for me. I was confused when my mom called me to the door and introduced me to him. He said he lived down the block and wanted to know if I liked video games. Of course, I said yes. And his face lit up. He invited me over to his house to play Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. I didn't have that game but desperately wanted it, so I immediately agreed. We walked to his house, which was literally the corner house at the opposite end of the street. Right away, I felt like the house looked less nice than every other house on the block. It was the same size as most, but it just looked run down and neglected. There was no grass. The front yard was just two big patches of dirt with a concrete walkway cutting through to the front door. We entered the house, and it was equally disheveled inside. It was like a house of hoarders' boxes. Old newspapers and junk were everywhere, piled high in every room. He led us to the basement, which smelled overpoweringly like 15 cats lived down there. A sour, musty odor that hit you in the face. Weirdly enough, there didn't seem to be any pets. The basement was a complete pigsty, maybe the messiest room in the house. We sat on this cracked, brown leather couch that was placed right in front of the TV. He booted up San Andreas on his PS2, and despite the grim surroundings, we played the two-player mode, and it was actually fun. In that moment, I thought I was going to like Alex and would want to be friends with him. Eventually, after about 2 hours, I wanted to go home. I said, "I gotta go," and he seemed really disappointed, like he wanted to keep hanging out for hours more. I just wanted to get back to my own clean, normal house. He followed me halfway home until I said, "See you later," basically a friendly way of saying, "All right, go away now." That was the first warning sign that Alex was a wacko. But I didn't find it truly concerning just yet. The next day, Alex rang the doorbell again. This time, we played GameCube in my room for about an hour. Not to sound mean, but I was starting to not really like him. I just felt like he was weird, and he made me deeply uncomfortable with how physically close he got to me, practically sitting on top of me on my bed. The next day after school, he rang the bell again. I wasn't in the mood and told my mom to tell him I didn't feel good, so he left. Honestly, I would have rather hung out with Dan, who I just like more. That same day, I rode my bike up to Dan's house to see if he could hang out. He was down, so we started riding our bikes further up the block, and this was a mistake. As we passed Alex's house, he came running outside onto his front stoop as if he had been sitting by the window, waiting. It was weird, but it was also incredibly awkward because I had just had my mom tell him that I was sick as we passed. I told Dan that I'd hung out with that kid and that he was slightly weird. Dan was shocked. "You hung out with him?" He said, "Dude, that whole family is crazy." I also found out from Dan that Alex was actually a couple of years older than me. He was 12. From this point, I decided to steer clear of him. The next weekend, Alex came to our door again asking for me. I'd already told my mom to tell him I wasn't home if he came back, so she did. But late that night, I woke up to my window being completely open, a cool breeze blowing into my room. It was a chilly September night, so I most definitely had left the window closed. Waking up to the unexpected cold made me question, who could have done that? Then I felt something poke my foot, and I screamed. I looked at the foot of my bed and saw Alex standing there in the dark. He told me to be quiet, that it was just him, before I could even ask what he was doing in my room. He explained that his parents were fighting, and he wanted to sleep with me. He had climbed through my window. I was in shock. "Get out," I told him, my voice shaking. He pleaded with me, begging to let him sleep in my bed. Again, I told him to get out. Watching him turn and climb back out of my window was a deeply disturbing scene. I closed the window and locked it, then went straight to my parents to wake them up. The next day, my parents both went down the block to talk to Alex's parents. When they came back, they said it didn't go well, apparently. Alex's crazy mom had screamed and laughed in my parents' faces, taking no accountability for her son's actions. A few nights later, I woke up to knocks at my window. I had my blinds closed, but I knew for a fact it was Alex. I didn't answer. The knocks went on and on for like 5 minutes, and I even heard an attempt at opening the window. I was actually scared. I remember my heart racing. Eventually, the knocking stopped. I went to tell my parents, and they told me to just ignore it. I think they weren't as threatened because, like I said before, Alex was just a kid. It was probably a few days later when Dan and I, along with another kid I'd made friends with from school, were biking from my house down the block. When we passed Alex's house, I saw him run to the window as we passed, and he just watched, his face a pale oval in the darkness of the house. That night, for the final time, I woke up to a sound in my room. It was the loud, explosive sound of my window being shattered. I screamed as I saw Alex climbing through the window, pushing his way through the no-broken blinds. I ran to my parents' room and woke them up. By this point, Alex was already back outside. My dad went outside and chased him all the way back to his house, with Alex making it back inside just before my dad could catch him. My dad pounded on the door until Alex's parents opened up, and my dad must have said something, right? Because he somehow managed to convince them to pay for the window if he didn't involve the police. They ended up paying, and I never heard from Alex again. I'm scared to wonder what kind of person he grew up to be.